The woman's hands trembled as she tried to count out the bills on the counter, her arthritic fingers fumbling with each crumpled 20. The clerk behind the desk didn't lower her voice when she said it. "Ma'am, if you can't pay the full amount today, you need to leave. You're holding up the line." Behind her, 6 people shifted their weight, phones out, watching. The old woman's lips pressed together, her eyes wet but not yet crying. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. The clerk sighed loudly, crossed her arms, and said it again, slower this time, like the woman was stupid. "Do you understand English?" Her name was Dorothy Brennan, and she was 90 years old. She had come to St. Matthew's Hospital that Tuesday morning because she'd received a letter 2 weeks prior. It said her account was overdue by $347. The letter was formal and cold, typed in a sans serif font that made every sentence feel like a demand. It said she had 14 days to resolve the balance, or the matter would be escalated to collections. Dorothy had read it 5 times at her kitchen table, her reading glasses sliding down her nose, her tea going cold beside her. She didn't understand. She had insurance. She had paid what they asked her to pay after her hip surgery in March. But the letter said otherwise, and the letter came from the hospital, so it had to be true. She lived alone in a small house on Maple Street, the same house she and her husband had bought in 1964. He'd been gone for 11 years now. Her daughter lived in Oregon, busy with her own life, her own children. Dorothy didn't want to bother her with this. She told herself it was a simple mistake. She would go to the hospital, show them her insurance card, show them the receipt from March, and they would fix it. That's what she told herself as she dressed that morning, carefully buttoning her cardigan, choosing her good shoes, even though they pinched her swollen feet. The bus ride took 40 minutes. She had to sit near the front because her knees didn't bend well anymore. The driver was kind. He waited for her to sit before pulling away from the curb. She watched the city roll past the window, the storefronts she no longer recognized, the coffee shops that used to be hardware stores. When she got off at the hospital stop, the curb seemed higher than she remembered. She steadied herself on the pole and stepped down carefully, her purse heavy on her shoulder. The hospital lobby was bright and enormous, all white tile and glass. People moved quickly around her, nurses in scrubs, visitors with flowers, everyone walking with purpose. Dorothy stood near the entrance for a moment, unsure. A sign above her head said billing in bold letters with an arrow pointing left. She followed it slowly, her cane tapping against the floor. Her hips still hurt sometimes, especially in the cold. It wasn't cold today, but it felt cold inside the hospital. The billing office was down a long hallway. By the time she reached it, her breath was short. There was a waiting area with plastic chairs and a counter with a glass partition. A woman sat behind it, young, maybe 30, with her hair pulled back tight and her nails painted dark red. She was typing something on her computer and didn't look up when Dorothy approached. Dorothy stood at the counter for a moment, waiting. She cleared her throat softly. The woman kept typing. Dorothy waited a bit longer, then said, "Excuse me." The woman looked up, her face neutral. "Name? Dorothy Brennan." The woman typed, clicked, scrolled. She frowned. "You're here about the overdue balance?" "Yes. I received a letter, but I think there's been a mistake." The woman's eyes stayed on the screen. "It says here you owe $347. Your insurance didn't cover part of the procedure. But I already paid what they told me to pay. I have the receipt at home." "Then you should have brought it." Dorothy blinked. "I can bring it. I just wanted to—" "Ma'am, if you don't have proof of payment, I can't help you. You need to either pay the balance today or set up a payment plan. But I don't owe it. I already. That's what everyone says." The woman's voice was flat, bored. She glanced past Dorothy toward the people sitting in the waiting area. "If you're not paying today, you need to step aside. There's a line." Dorothy turned. There were 6 people sitting in the chairs, all of them looking at their phones or staring into space. None of them seemed impatient. But the clerk was already waving her hand, a dismissive little flick of her wrist. "Next." Dorothy didn't move. Her chest felt tight. "Please, I just need someone to look at my account. I paid in March. I remember." The clerk exhaled through her nose, loud enough for Dorothy to hear. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows on the desk. "Ma'am, I've looked at your account. It says you owe $347. If you paid, it would show up. It doesn't. So either you pay it now, or you leave. I don't have that much with me. Then you need to leave. Can I speak to a manager? The clerk's jaw tightened. She sat back in her chair, her arms crossing over her chest. A manager isn't going to tell you anything different. You owe the money. That's it. Dorothy's hands were shaking now. She reached into her purse, pulled out her wallet. Her fingers felt clumsy, thick. She opened it and started counting the bills inside. 3 20s, a 10, a 5, 4 ones, $79. She had $79. She looked up at the clerk, her voice small. I have 79. Can I pay this now and bring the rest later? The clerk didn't even look at the money. No, full payment or nothing. Please. Ma'am, you're holding up the line. There was no line. The people in the waiting area weren't standing. They weren't moving. But the clerk said it again, louder this time, her voice carrying across the small office. You're holding up the line. If you can't pay, you need to leave. One of the people in the waiting area looked up, a man in a baseball cap. He glanced at Dorothy, then back at his phone. Dorothy felt her face go hot. She tried to put the money back in her wallet, but her hands weren't working right. A $5 bill slipped out of her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She bent down to pick it up, her hips screaming in protest, her cane clattering against the counter. The clerk watched her, arms still crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Dorothy straightened slowly, the $5 bill clutched in her hand. She tried to speak, but her throat was too tight. The clerk leaned forward again, her voice dripping with impatience. Do you understand English? The room went silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pause. Dorothy stared at the woman behind the glass, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. The clerk stared back, unmoved. I'm going to ask you to leave now. If you don't, I'll call security. Dorothy's voice came out as a whisper. I just wanted to fix a mistake. There's no mistake. You owe the money. That's how this works. A woman in the waiting area, older, maybe 60, shifted in her seat. She looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The man in the baseball cap glanced up again, then away. Dorothy felt the weight of their silence like a hand pressing on her chest. The clerk reached for her phone, her finger hovering over a button. Last chance. Leave, or I'm calling security. Dorothy nodded once, a small, defeated movement. She put her wallet back in her purse, her hands still trembling. She turned toward the door, her cane tapping softly against the tile. Each step felt like it took all the strength she had left. Behind her, the clerk's voice rang out, bright and false. Next. Dorothy made it halfway down the hallway before she had to stop. She leaned against the wall, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her hip throbbed, her chest hurt. She closed her eyes and tried to steady herself. She thought about calling her daughter, but the thought of explaining this, of admitting she couldn't even handle a simple bill, made her feel small and useless. She stayed there for a long time, people walking past her, no one stopping to ask if she was okay. She didn't know that the payment she'd made in March had been applied to the wrong account, a clerical error. Her name misspelled in the system by a single letter, Brennan instead of Brennan. The payment sat in a digital limbo, attached to no one, flagged by no one, and because no one had caught it, the system sent her a letter, cold and automatic, demanding money she didn't owe. She didn't know that the clerk behind the counter, whose name was Angela Pryor, had been written up twice in the past year for being rude to patients. She didn't know that Angela's supervisor had warned her that one more complaint would mean termination. She didn't know that Angela was tired, stressed about her own bills, her own life, and that she'd stopped seeing the people in front of her as human a long time ago. Dorothy took the bus home. She sat in the same seat near the front, her purse clutched on her lap. When she got to her house, she unlocked the door, walked inside, and sat at her kitchen table. The letter was still there, next to her cold tea. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and did something she hadn't wanted to do. She called her daughter. Her daughter's name was Claire. She answered on the third ring, her voice distracted. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Dorothy's voice cracked. "I need your help." Claire listened. She asked questions. Her voice shifted from distracted to focused, to angry. "They treated you like that? In front of people? It's fine. It's not fine, Mom. That's not okay." I don't want to make trouble. You're not making trouble. They are. Claire told her to take a picture of the receipt from March and text it to her. Dorothy didn't know how to do that, so Claire walked her through it, patient and calm. Once she had the photo, Claire told her mother not to worry. She would handle it. Dorothy wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't necessary, but she was too tired. She thanked her daughter and hung up. Claire didn't call the billing office. She called a lawyer. His name was Martin Rees, and he specialized in patient advocacy and elder law. Claire had found him online, read reviews, and called him the same day. When she explained what had happened, Martin listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked her to send him everything, the letter, the receipt, any correspondence Dorothy had received. Claire did. Martin reviewed it that night. The next morning, he called Claire back. "Your mother doesn't owe them a cent," he said, "and the way she was treated is a violation of about 4 different patient rights policies. Can we do something about it?" "We can, but it depends on what your mother wants." Claire asked her mother. Dorothy said she just wanted the bill to go away. She didn't want to cause problems. Claire told her that wasn't causing problems, that was fixing them. Dorothy, hesitant, agreed to let Martin help. Martin reached out to St. Matthew's Hospital directly. He didn't call the billing office. He called the hospital's legal department. He explained the situation calmly, professionally. He mentioned the clerical error, the payment sitting in the wrong account, the treatment Dorothy had received. He suggested they might want to resolve this quietly before it became something larger. The hospital's legal team took him seriously. They pulled the records. They found the misapplied payment within 2 hours. They corrected it. They sent Dorothy a letter of apology, but Martin wasn't done. He requested a meeting with the hospital's patient advocacy board. He brought documentation, the original letter, the receipt, a written statement from Dorothy describing what had happened in the billing office, and witness testimony from the woman who had been sitting in the waiting area that day. Her name was Janet Ruiz, and she had been so bothered by what she'd seen that she'd asked for Angela Pryor's name afterward. She gave a statement willingly. The hospital agreed to an internal review. Angela Pryor was called into a meeting with her supervisor and a representative from Human Resources. They played it by the book. They asked her to describe the interaction. She did, her voice defensive. She said Dorothy had been confused, uncooperative, holding up the line. The supervisor asked if there had been a line. Angela hesitated. She said there were people waiting. The supervisor asked if any of them had complained. Angela said no. The supervisor asked if she had raised her voice. Angela said she might have. To be clear, the supervisor asked if she had questioned whether Dorothy understood English. Angela went quiet. They told her she was being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, Angela argued. She said she'd been doing her job. She said people like Dorothy came in all the time, trying to get out of paying, making excuses. The HR representative stopped her. People like Dorothy? Angela didn't answer. The investigation took 2 weeks. They reviewed her file, her previous complaints, the statements from witnesses. They determined that her conduct had violated the hospital's patient dignity policies. She was terminated. But the story didn't end there, because Martin Rees filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Health, not against Angela specifically, but against the hospital's billing practices and patient treatment protocols. The complaint triggered an audit. The audit revealed that St. Matthews had a pattern of clerical errors in their billing system, dozens of patients affected, many of them elderly, many of them too intimidated or confused to fight back. The state issued a formal reprimand and required the hospital to overhaul their billing software and retrain their entire billing staff. And then Martin did one more thing. He reached out to a local journalist. Her name was Sophie Tran, and she wrote for the city's largest newspaper. She'd covered healthcare stories before, patient advocacy, elder abuse. When Martin explained what had happened to Dorothy, Sophie was interested. She reached out to Dorothy directly, asked if she'd be willing to talk. Dorothy was reluctant. She didn't want attention. But Claire encouraged her. She told her mother that telling her story might help someone else. Dorothy agreed. The article ran on a Sunday. The headline read, 90-year-old woman humiliated over hospital bill she didn't owe, how a broken system fails our elders. It included Dorothy's photo, her face kind and tired, and a quote, "I just wanted them to listen." The article went viral online. People shared it, commented, expressed outrage. Some shared their own stories of being mistreated in medical billing offices, of being talked down to, of being made to feel small. The hospital issued a public apology. They announced policy changes, mandatory sensitivity training, a new patient liaison program, but Dorothy didn't see most of that. She didn't follow the online reaction. She didn't read the comments. What mattered to her happened 3 weeks after the article ran. She received a letter, not from the hospital, from a law office. It was an invitation to a small claims court hearing. Martin had filed a claim on her behalf for emotional distress and elder mistreatment. Dorothy hadn't asked him to. When she called him, confused, he explained gently, "You don't have to do anything, Dorothy, but if you're willing, I think it's important, not for the money, for the accountability." Dorothy thought about it. She talked to Claire. Claire said it was up to her, but that she'd be there if Dorothy wanted to go through with it. Dorothy said yes. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September. The courthouse was small, old, with wooden benches and high ceilings. Dorothy arrived early. Claire beside her, Martin waiting by the door. He smiled when he saw her, shook her hand gently. "You doing okay?" "I'm nervous." "That's normal." "You're going to do great." The hearing was in a small room, not a grand courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s, her hair grey, her expression serious but not unkind. Her name was Judge Patricia Hollis. She had a reputation for being fair, thorough, and completely intolerant of nonsense. Angela Pryor was there. She sat at a table on the opposite side of the room, no lawyer, her arms crossed, her face set in a stubborn mask. She glanced at Dorothy once when she walked in, then looked away. The hearing began. Martin presented his case calmly. He described the billing error, the hospital's failure to catch it, Dorothy's attempt to resolve it, and Angela's treatment of her. He submitted the written statements, the documentation, the timeline. Judge Hollis listened, her fingers steepled in front of her, her eyes moving between the papers and Martin's face. When Martin finished, Judge Hollis turned to Angela. "Miss Pryor, you're here representing yourself. Do you have anything to say?" Angela stood. Her voice was tight. "Your Honor, I was doing my job. Mrs. Brennan owed money according to the system. I didn't make the mistake. I was just following procedure." Judge Hollis looked at her for a long moment. "Following procedure includes questioning whether someone understands English?" Angela's face flushed. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" Angela didn't answer. Judge Hollis glanced at the papers in front of her. "According to the witness statement, you raised your voice. You threatened to call security. You refused to even look into the possibility of an error. Does that sound like following procedure to you?" She was holding up the line. There was no line. Judge Hollis's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. There were people sitting in chairs. None of them complained. "You used that as an excuse to dismiss a 90-year-old woman who came to you for help." Angela's jaw tightened. "I deal with people every day who try to get out of paying. And how do you know Mrs. Brennan was one of them?" "I didn't." "You didn't know. You assumed. You assumed, and you treated her accordingly." Judge Hollis leaned forward slightly. "Miss Pryor, do you understand what your job was supposed to be?" Angela didn't answer. Judge Hollis continued, her voice even. "Your job was to help patients navigate a confusing, often intimidating system. Your job was to listen, to check, to treat people with dignity, especially when they're vulnerable. Instead, you made a 90-year-old woman feel worthless because you couldn't be bothered to do the most basic part of your job, verify the information in front of you." Angela's face was red now, her hands clenched at her sides. Judge Hollis looked at Dorothy. "Mrs. Brennan, is there anything you'd like to say?" Dorothy hadn't expected to be asked. She glanced at Claire, who nodded encouragingly. Dorothy stood slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I just wanted someone to listen. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I've never caused trouble. I thought if I went there, if I explained, they would help me. But she made me feel like I was lying, like I was stupid, and all those people were watching, and I just wanted to go home." Her voice broke on the last word. She sat down, Claire's hand on her shoulder. The room was silent. Judge Hollis looked at Angela again. "Do you have anything to say to Mrs. Brennan?" Angela hesitated. For a moment, something flickered in her face, something that might have been regret or shame, But then her jaw set again, and she shook her head. "No, Your Honor." Judge Hollis's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. She looked down at her notes, then back up. "Miss Pryor, I'm ruling in favor of Mrs. Brennan. You are ordered to pay $2,000 in damages for emotional distress. Additionally, I'm recommending that this case be forwarded to the State Labor Board for review, given the circumstances of your termination and the pattern of behavior documented here." Angela's face went pale. "Your Honor, I'm not finished." Judge Hollis's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. "You stood in front of a woman who had lived 90 years, who had survived things you probably can't imagine, and you treated her like she was nothing. You had power in that moment, and you abused it. Not because you had to, because you wanted to. Because it was easier than doing your job. I see people like you in this courtroom all the time, Miss Pryor. People who forget that the person in front of them is a person. I don't have patience for it. And I hope, for your sake, that you learn something from this." She brought her gavel down once, sharp and final. "We're adjourned." Angela left the courtroom quickly, her head down, her shoulders hunched. Dorothy watched her go, and for a moment she felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not victory, just sadness. Sadness that it had come to this, that someone could be so unkind. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and clean. Claire hugged her mother, and Martin shook her hand again. "You did great in there," he said. Dorothy smiled, small but real. "Thank you for all of this. You deserved someone in your corner." They walked to the parking lot together. Claire's arm looped through Dorothy's. As they reached the car, Dorothy paused, looking back at the courthouse. Claire followed her gaze. "You okay, Mom?" Dorothy nodded. "I just keep thinking about what the judge said, about how easy it is to forget someone's a person." Claire squeezed her arm gently. "You reminded her." They drove home in comfortable silence. When they pulled up to Dorothy's house, Claire walked her to the door, made sure she was settled. Before she left, she hugged her mother again, longer this time. "I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For not giving up." Dorothy watched her daughter drive away, then went inside. She made herself a cup of tea, sat at her kitchen table, and looked out the window at her small backyard. The leaves were starting to turn, autumn coming on, slow and steady. She thought about the hearing, about the judge's words, about Angela's face when the gavel came down. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired and a little bit lighter. The $2,000 arrived in a check 6 weeks later. Dorothy didn't need it, not really. She thought about what to do with it for a long time. Finally, she donated it to a local legal aid fund that helped elderly people navigate medical billing disputes. She didn't tell anyone. She just did it. Life went on. Dorothy kept to her routines. She went to the grocery store on Thursdays, took the bus to the library on Tuesdays. People who had read the article sometimes recognized her, offered kind words. She smiled and thanked them but didn't linger. She wasn't interested in being a symbol. She was just Dorothy. But something had changed. She felt it in small ways. The way she held her head a little higher when she walked into a store. The way she didn't apologize when she took an extra moment to count her change. The way she didn't shrink when someone spoke to her impatiently. She had been heard. She had been seen. And that mattered more than any check or any headline. One Saturday afternoon in late October, she was at the grocery store, standing in the checkout line. The cashier was young, maybe 20, moving fast, scanning items with practiced efficiency. When Dorothy's turn came, she placed her items on the belt slowly, her hands careful. The cashier glanced at her, then at the line behind her. Dorothy saw the flicker of impatience in her eyes, the way her jaw tightened. But then the cashier paused. She looked at Dorothy's face, really looked, and something softened. "Take your time, ma'am," she said, her voice gentle. "No rush." Dorothy smiled. "Thank you." The cashier smiled back. It was a small moment, barely worth noting. But Dorothy felt it, the shift, the kindness. She paid for her groceries, thanked the cashier again, and walked out into the cool October air. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with orange and pink. Dorothy stood on the sidewalk for a moment, her grocery bag in one hand, her cane in the other, and looked up at the sky. She thought about the judge's words, about how easy it is to forget someone's a person. She thought about Angela Pryor and wondered if she'd learned anything. She hoped so, not for her own sake, but for the sake of the next person Angela would meet. Dorothy took a deep breath, the air crisp and clean, and started walking toward the bus stop. Her hip hurt, but it always hurt. That was just part of being 90. She'd learned to live with it, the same way she'd learned to live with a lot of things. Loss and loneliness, and a world that moved too fast. But she'd also learned something else, that she still mattered, that her dignity wasn't something someone else could take away unless she let them, and she wasn't going to let them. What do you think happens when someone in a position of power forgets that the person in front of them has a story, a life, decades of experience? Drop your thoughts below, and if this story hit you the way it hit me, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the smallest act of standing up creates the biggest change.